All right, and welcome to another talk. We've got Ron Kasman here. I've known Ron for a long time. Ron, how about introducing yourself and telling people what you do and stuff like that?
Thanks. Um, Ron Kasman. I live in Toronto. Uh, I live with my wife and my young daughter. She's 5 years old. Uh, I have a stepchild and another child who are adults beside that. Um, I was a school teacher for 31 years, and while I was teaching, I did a lot of lettering and the occasional comic book story. When I retired, I started working up a longer story, a graphic novel. I thought I thought it would work. Like I had it in my head that I could do this sort of thing, and eventually finished it. It was rejected 16 times, and the 17th attempt at a sale was to Caliber Entertainment um, in Detroit, and they took it. So I started on another one. They took that one too, and now I'm on page 126 of the third graphic novel. Now, my son says to me that if I can get three of these things out, he'll tell people that his dad is a graphic novelist. Until then, his dad is a retired school teacher, and I think that's a fair way of looking at it. So I'm a retired school teacher who's trying to get somewhere with the graphic novels. There.
Nice. Now, how did you get into comics, Ron?
Well, I enjoyed I'm 66 years old. When I was a kid, comic books were a mass media. Everybody read comic books. I read them more than most. The reason for this was I had a beloved aunt, Annie, and Annie did not have an easy life. About the time I was born, which was about the time her third child was born, her husband, still in his 30s, dropped dead from a heart attack. And her husband ran a newsstand. Newsstands no longer exist. What Annie's daughter told me was that the newsstands moved into the subways as the subway system got bigger. When you go into the subway, you'll often see someone selling magazines to your left, and you might buy a magazine before you step on the subway. That's what's left of the news dealers. When you think of the news dealers, you probably think of old Jack Kirby comics with a kid going, extra, extra, read all about it. That's essentially what my aunt did. And back then, as you know, if you couldn't sell a comic book, you tore off the top third, you tore off the title. The titles went back to the distributor, I suppose. But Aunt Annie's kids would be able to read the comic books, and then I assumed they would go to the nieces and nephews. So we had more than most, and I just loved comic books. My favorite one was Superman, and that meant Superman, Lois Lane, action, world's finest. I think there were Adventures, Superboy. I think there were 7 comics that featured Superman at the time. I'll just be a moment. And I think they were the ones that Warren Weisinger edited. So I took a love to Superman, and I remember going into variety stores, which were sometimes called cigar stores. I suppose they started out selling tobacco. And I'd go in, I'd bend down because the comics were generally down low, and I put my knees on tabloid newspapers like National Enquirer, which was a newspaper then, and I pick them out. And I remember looking at some of those fantastic Superman covers when I was a kid. So as time went on, I started imitating the artists that I love. Actually, I mean, the name Kurt Swan was not known at the time. Karl Barks was not known. I just imitated. I imitated the drawings. That's what I did. Didn't know who did them, had no idea. And to me, Kurt Schappenberger, Al Plastino, I think I've got his name right, Kurt Swan, they were all the same person. They were all working to model. Couldn't tell them apart, but I would imitate those drawings. And when I was about 14, 15, people started saying, "You're an artist." And what I was someone who drew in his spare time. So that's how I got into it. One day, I got a copy of Avengers 4. I was sick in bed with the measles, and Annie gave me a stack of comics. Let's see, I'm trying to do it right on the camera, like that. And I was a very methodical kid. So what I would do is I'd read a Superman, and then I'd read a second-rate comic like Green Lantern. Then I'd read another Superman, and then I'd read a Tower comic. I don't even know if Tower was around, but I'd read something by another company, or maybe a Classics Illustrated, another Superman, and eventually, what turned up was Avengers number 4, which is the first Captain America issue, and the plot of which is pretty much the hook of the first Avengers movie. And it was a little bit like a kid watching a video for the first time, and that video happens to be Lord of the Rings, and he becomes a fantasy fan for life. So when I read Avengers 4, I became a Marvel madman. I wasn't aware of the numbers, but I decided I'm going to collect those. So the next time I went into a store, this was a pharmacy, the Kang the Conqueror issue was there, which, as we all know, is Avengers number 8. So I purchased that. I started to fill in. And back then, you could fill in the issues. I don't think I paid 20 cents for one. And this wasn't through a collector. This was through an obstinate kid at a school sale. There really were no yard sales, but they would have sort of bake sales in schools. So an obstinate kid had just bought a copy of Avengers number 2, and I think that's the Space Phantom issue. And I don't know what he paid for it, 2 cents. And I started bargaining with him, and it went up to 20 cents, but I had to fill it in. So I filled in the Avengers that way. I came across Fantastic Four number 18, or maybe it was 19. It was the Ramatut issue. And I found out that the Fantastic Four were just as good as the Avengers, maybe better. Anyway, the story I'm telling you is the same story that just about every comics fan my age has. We read it because they were common, and they were also cheap.
Yeah, they were. When I started collecting, I think they were about 15 cents when I started buying comics.
When I started, they were 12 cents. I don't remember the 10-cent ones, but I remember getting them, through trade. They just sort of filter over. Remember, comics were said to have a 3-year life at the time. After 3 years, there'd be so many phone numbers written on them, and so many people would have read them that the covers fell off and Mummy would throw them away. So I only got the odd 10-cent ones, and nobody was aware of the history of comics at the time. At the time, there were no books written on the history. Now, there's a history of just about everything, like just about down to the guy who put the page numbers on the page. His account, I'm up here for the world to see. I realize the world is not watching. There are other important things going on too, but the world can hear my story now. Back then, nobody had the story. If it said number 256, we could do the math, say 12 issues per year, and take it back to the correct year. But we didn't know what was going on. We had an address for the head office, Stan Lee, and before him Bill Gaines, but I never saw an EC. But Stan Lee started printing the names of these people, and he told us that Jack Kirby was the king of comics. So what else would I believe? I had no other information. But I did love the Jack Kirby books. I love the Steve Ditko books. I love the Don Heck and Dick Ayers books too. Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, which was largely done by Dick Ayers, was one of my favorites at the time. Daredevil too. Daredevil was done by all kinds of people. They couldn't find a regular artist on it. So there was a little run with Wally Wood, and then there was a little run with Johnny Romita, and Gene Colan seemed to establish himself as the artist on it. But when I was a little kid reading those first issues, Bill Everett, Joe Orlando, I just loved them. Whatever Lee did, I give credit to Kirby and Ditko and the others too. But whatever Lee did, he was able to do it no matter who the artist was at the time. He was able to do it for about 3 years and then it kind of faded, and they built on what Stanley and those other people had done.
Yeah. My first, I remember my first readings were, I don't remember what books I read, but I had a cousin that was into comic books, and that's what got me into comic books. So it always leads to from somebody to somebody else to get you into comic books.
I guess so. But as I said, it was a mass media when I was a kid. There was a kid 2 blocks away named Henry Mink, and Henry was an interesting guy. I remember that he collected Daredevil and X-Men, and I collected Avengers. So when I got to his place, I'd look at those and read those, and we had like a 2-person fan club, I suppose. We had an intense love of the comics. And Henry did not become a comic fan. I became a comic fan. Henry stopped probably when he was 11 or 12, like most kids did back then. I didn't.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure why that was. This story is true, and I'll mention his name. Not to embarrass him, he was a great guy. But just to say that some things really stay with you. I had a friend named Howard Sniatowski, and we were not close friends, but he was a school friend. He was a nice fella. There's no question he was a nice guy. And Howard said to me, Ron, this is in front of other people. He said, Ron, when are you going to stop reading comics and start going out with girls? And I know that what he said was apparent to everyone. And it would be years before I started going out with girls. But the other kids were going out with girls. The other kids were not reading comics. And I was doing this strange thing. There might have been 10 kids in the school who read comics. And when I was in, I think, grade 13, there used to be grade 13, we had a little club. And most of them weren't into comics. It was science fiction, horror, fantasy. It was that whole thing that they were into. So I remember doing a little presentation for them on Jim Steranko. And we did presentations once a week after school. So there were this is a school of over 2,000 kids, 2,200 kids. And there might have been 10 kids in the whole school that cared about it at all. And when I went to my first comic convention at age 16, nobody else from my high school was going there. It was just me. Of course, being a comic fan was a very rare thing at the time. The biggest comic book fanzine was Rockets. It was called Rockets Blast Comic Collector. It might have had 1,000 people who were purchasing it on the subscription list. Now, there were 250 million people in North America at the time, and there were about 1,000 people getting Rockets Blast. The biggest convention in North America was in New York, and it was called the New York Comic Art Convention, sometimes called the Phil Suling Convention because he was the fellow who put it on. 500 people went there. That was it. Excuse me. If there was one kid in your high school into it, you had a lot of kids in your high school into it, and that's how it was in my school. The other 9 kids knew what comics were. They might have even been readers, but they might have preferred science fiction or horror. And I was the guy holding up the comic books. I consider myself a social pioneer for this. Now it's a worldwide phenomenon. The Avengers movie, the last 2 Avengers movies, each made well over $1 billion. It might have been over $2 billion each worldwide. And I was there for Avengers number 4. I'm kind of proud of that. Oh, and Howard Sniatowski. I went to a comic convention. Toronto used to host one-day comic conventions. I was probably 35. When we spoke in high school, I was probably 17. And who should be behind a dealer's table? Howard Sniatowski. He got into it at a certain point himself. And I didn't remind him of what he said. It has stuck with me. Sometimes little things will stick with you. But Howard was too good of an individual for me to remind him of a minor slight he made, which he probably didn't even remember it 5 minutes after he said it. It was probably just another little joke, but it struck me harder than he knew. Would you like me to go on a bit more about how I got into this?
Well, what did you do for getting into art? Like you said, you did it from the comic books. Did you take any lessons? Did you go?
Oh yeah, I did. Okay, I was a very, and I remain a very, very bad artist. It's not that I'm okay. I'm gonna hold up. Let's see if you can how well you can see that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
It doesn't look so great on the screen either. I was hoping that would look at least good. It doesn't really, but it's there. It's not that I can't do it. I can. It's just that it took a long time for me to learn. I learned very slowly, and there's an awful lot I can't do. When I look at someone like Dave Ross, who worked for Marvel in DC, and before that he worked for Pacific and Eclipse, when he was 23, he was 10 times the artist I am at 66. And but Dave Sims said something to me when I was in my 20s. He said, all that you have to be is good enough. So they're not asking me to draw Avengers West Coast like Dave drew. If they did, it would be a complete embarrassment. But I can draw something of my own script and make it look adequate, maybe even a step or two beyond adequate. And so I say to myself, I'm good enough. So what I did was, you know, I'd see friends who could draw, and I'd say, I can do better than that. And then I'd go home and I'd try, and I usually couldn't. But in that same blind leading the blind way, I started copying other people. I started getting books on how to draw, started drawing from life. And then I would be as good as them, but they would have gotten better. And for the first 3-4 years, it was like that, having no idea where I was going, barely having a clue. Then I was in university. I took a year of science. And without academic penalty, I went into fine arts. And it was a bit of fish out of water. I spent my whole life with the sciences and maths. And then I was walking into an area where they looked at things a different way. Now, keep in mind, this is the early 1970s. And it was the tail end of the hippie era. But we didn't know it was the tail end. We thought that hippie stuff would be around forever. So they hired hippie, not entirely hippie professors, but they hired a wide range of professors. They didn't, I wouldn't say they did a wide range of art. A lot of them were abstract expressionists and pop artists, which was not what I wanted at all. But I was there. I wanted to get a degree. So in 1972, September, I started the first year at York University. And I managed. I actually graduated with high marks. But what slowed me down was if I tried to do something realistic, it was very, very time consuming. You know, if you're throwing paint at a canvas, no matter how beautifully, it can be done quicker than trying to do a painting in oils. So we were discouraged from spending a lot of time on stuff by that. Comic books were laughed at the time. There was one professor, his name was David, I hope I pronounced it right, Bulldog. And he was a rather famous Canadian artist. He was even famous at the time. He was just a kid himself. He was maybe 27 years old. He was a small man. Made him look like a student. And I took a course with him where I could develop some of the program on my own and with him. And what I did was I started doing drawings from, what was it now? Arabian Nights. He suggested Arabian Nights. So I had to go through various processes. And though he was, I think we call him a color field painter at the time, He understood how drawing worked, and he was willing to talk to me about it and tell me what the next step would be and the next step. So going to art school, I didn't learn much from most of the teachers, but I learned a little bit from many of the teachers. It also gave me time to draw from the model. It gave me time to draw, period. Uh, so it did me some good. I think if I went to a place like Sheridan College or OCA, I'd be a better artist today. But I would certainly be a different kind of artist. I would have perhaps learned how to make up figures better than I do now. My figures are rather stiff, rather plain. Um, I purposefully draw people in natural positions. When you look at a superhero comic, and I'm going to do my best here. You get people, here. Where do I move here? Posing like this all the time. They talk like this. That's not life. So even the people who draw realistically, people like maybe Gray Morrow, Reed Crandall, Wally Wood, they draw people in comic booky poses, but realistic looking people. I draw realistic looking people, usually in fairly realistic poses. I mean, even when you get mad, you don't ball a fist and start shaking it up high. That's, I guess people are fair to say, pardon me, that's comic book stuff. Going like, that's a comic book pose. So I don't draw those much. Most of the people I draw are quiet. If you look at the lighting on me right now, okay. Oh, gee, everything's backwards. I'm just going to talk. This is just about black. This is just about black. But shadows tend to be transparent. So I draw transparent shadows. I'll use black as a color, but I won't put in that Milkana style shadow that other people put in. That developed over time. Anyway, I then got a second degree. I got a Bachelor of Education. I got an honors Bachelor of Fine Arts in visual art. Then I got a Bachelor of Education in visual art and, believe it or not, phys ed. So I was able to teach in the high schools and intermediate schools. Unfortunately, at the time, they didn't need too many teachers. So it became apparent that the chances of me getting a job were slim. And there were a lot of people better than me who didn't get jobs teaching. It was a combination of skill and luck. I think I was good, but I think they were better. I was lucky. Sometimes good plus luck beats very good. And that's where I was there. So looked like I wasn't going to get a job. At the time, there was something called Circular 14. And that was the list that would allow you to use a book in a class. So I decided to try to draw a comic book and getting onto Circular 14. So I was 23 at the time. The book was called William Lyon Mackenzie and the Rebellion of 1837 in Upper Canada. And I'm going to pull a copy out just a minute. Okay. This is the super duper deluxe copy of William Lyon Mackenzie by Ron Kasman. It's leather bound. What they did was they published probably tens of thousands of them on paper, black and white interior, with that cover. But they published a box full, which is maybe 100, with this cover, leather bound. The reason they did that, this was published by the William Lyon Mackenzie Printery in Queenston Heights. They had a little bit of influence. They were a good association. It was a charitable organization. And they got James K. Bartleman to promote the thing. That name probably doesn't mean anything to you. He was the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. Just a second, I've got an unknown caller. I think I'm going to talk to the unknown caller in a little while, but I'm going to have to say to the caller, excuse me. Hello, caller. I'm going to have to call you back. Is that okay? It's okay.
Good.
Thanks for your patience. So James K. Bartleman was doing something called the Crusade for Literacy, and he probably handed out 10,000 of these things, maybe even more, across Ontario for kids to read. The other thing was, being in fine arts, I made friends with people who had different interests than me, but still interested in art. One of my buddies opened up a gallery, and he knew all the people who had galleries. And as I was drawing that, he said, you know, Ron, there's a gallery that just might take that. So he and I went over to this gallery called the Market Gallery of the City of Toronto Archives. That's what it was called. And I didn't know from galleries. I didn't go into private galleries. So another thing I didn't know was that people will do all kinds of things. They will do handsprings to get into galleries and have one-man shows. I didn't. I went there with Mark. Mark said to the curator, you might like this guy's stuff. And she looked at it. My stuff wasn't very good, but she had looked at a lot of comics, and to her it was just another comic. You know, a bit like I was saying, Kurt Swan, Al Plastino, Kurt Schaffenberger, they were all the same. I was the same as Al Williamson to her. It was all the same. So she looked at it, and it was about the first mayor of Toronto. William Lyon Mackenzie was the first mayor of Toronto. And she worked in the Toronto Archives. This was the gallery of the Toronto Archives. So she said, yeah, we'll take it. And in November, I had an exhibit there. Because it was a prestigious gallery and because it was owned by the city, two things happened. One was that the mayor of Toronto, and his name escapes me at the moment, but the mayor was there. So the mayor came to see my stuff. The other thing that happened was a journalist for the Toronto Star was there. The Toronto Star rarely did, they did one gallery review per week. The one gallery review that week was mine, and it took up a full column on the front cover of the entertainment section. Everybody saw the article about William Lyon Mackenzie. So I should remind my son that, you know, if he likes, he can consider this my third graphic novel. But it was out of sequence, and it was done at a time where I didn't know which end of the pen was up. I barely knew which end of the pen was up. I learned more later, and in a certain way, I still barely know which end of the pen is up. It's not easy doing these things. Okay?
Yeah, everything's good there, Ron. All right.
Should I continue, or I'd love to hear your questions and comments.
Yeah, I'm looking for. We've got a few people watching. I haven't seen any comments come in. What was your first? I don't know if you said it or anything, Ron. When I was just had to step for a moment out. What was your first professional work besides that Mackenzie book? Was there anything like Marvel or anything that you did?
Oh yeah, no, no. I had a good response from Marvel. I had two good responses, but it's like losing to a good team by a goal. I mean, I didn't get in. I went to Marvel, and they said come back in 4 hours. This was for my pencils, and this was when I was in my late 20s. And the lady at the front, I went there. The lady called Jim Shooter, and Shooter said, I don't know where it is. And the lady said, we've lost it. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean you lost it? This is all my stuff. This was before you could really make a good photocopy. So she said, no, it's good that we've lost it. We have about 25 editors, and we've lost it means Shooter took it, and he's now passing it through the editors. He thinks it's good enough, but if being good enough and having an editor hire you are two different things. So went all the way through the editors. Nobody wanted me. That was that. And I was teaching at the time. You know, I wasn't about to quit the day job. If I actually did get in, and I didn't, what would I have been doing? You know, 5, 6 page backup stories in minor books, and after a year or so be swept out the door so they could hire somebody else. You know, that's the best I could hope for, and I knew it. And I wasn't going to quit a job that had a dental plan for that reception. I knew the reputation of comics. I really wanted to see if I could get in, and I couldn't. So, time number 2, Mark Grunwald is the editor-in-chief. So, at the time I was lettering, and though I don't draw very well, I'm not a bad letterer. So I went to DC. I got a job at DC as a letterer. I had to go back to school in September. I was off for a year, so I was able to work for them. I got jobs at Eclipse. I got jobs at every company. I got jobs at Image. Every company I wanted to work for, I did work for. The one exception being Marvel. And I got a letter, though, from the editor-in-chief, Mark Grunwald, saying, your lettering is just fine. I passed it, same story, I passed it around to the editors. But then he said, if you don't hear from one of them within a month, let me know, and I'll see what I can do. So he wanted me there. But I don't remember. Oh, I know what was stopping me. I had so much work at the time. I also had a little child at the time. The pressure was unbelievable. The letterer is the one who makes it up for all the people who are behind on their deadlines. And one time I got the FedEx truck pulling up in front, and I was working on a strip that said, no, not another one. I'm having enough trouble with this one. And then 3 hours later, another FedEx truck pulled up. And you're only as good as your reputation. Letterers are completely and utterly, I mean, maybe if you're a Todd Klein or a John Constanza, you're not interchangeable. But I was interchangeable with 100 other people. And if I didn't get the stuff in on time, they weren't going to be nice to me. So I was working quite late, you know, getting that stuff in. So I didn't pursue Marvel. So that's my story with the big companies. Didn't cut it as a penciler, and my lettering cut it at DC, and it would have cut it at Marvel. Like, I don't tell people I worked for Marvel, I didn't. But you know, like Rocky, I could have been a contender.
Mm-hmm.
But for Marvel's not you know, it's not like penciler on the X-Men or Fantastic Four. It's a letterer on a third-run book. That's all.
Yeah. And you didn't try for inking or something like that, because you have your style kind of reminds me of Al Milgram's stuff.
Oh, well, I know exactly what his stuff looks like. We're about the same age. That might be why. He's a good drawer too, like way beyond me. What happened with inking? I'm a bad inker, but at least I'm a bad inker. I'm not, you know, I'm at best third rung. I remember going to Fantagraphics, and I'm trying to remember the names of those guys, Kim Thompson and Gary Groff.
Yeah.
And I showed them a strip they did, and they said, well, we don't print strips like this. This is superhero stuff. And I said, yeah, but you know, Marvel would want this. And they said, no, they wouldn't, but they want you as an inker. And I said, you know what you're talking about? And they said, yeah, we know what we're talking about. Now, they might have known what they're talking about. Certainly, they didn't have to speak with the quality of the book hanging over their heads. If someone gives Ron Kasman a job as an inker, and the sales of the book start going down, or the penciler complains, so much for Ron Kasman and so much for the editor who assigned it, they're worried too. So anyway, I had two guys who I respect saying, yeah, you could get a job at Marvel. But I don't think I could have. Inkers, again, if you're Tom Palmer, who I think is still alive, or if you're Joe Sinnott, who just passed on, you're not interchangeable. But if you're Al Milgrom, you're fairly interchangeable. And I'm not even Al Milgrom. So there.
Yeah. I always thought that your style kind of resembled his a bit, you know?
A little bit. I get it. I look
Yeah.
at his stuff too and say we're from the Joe Sinnott school. We use a brush line. It might be a wee bit on the thick side at times, and it's thin at one end, thick in the middle, and thin at the other end.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. And I had an ability to do that almost from the start. Um, there are people in Toronto like Ty Templeton who look like they're born with that brush in their hand, and I'm not, but I can do it. I think if I assisted someone, um, I'd probably do it adequately. They would want other people though. Who I'm trying to remember the fellow's name. There was a fellow in Detroit. He was a very nice guy, Tim Zahn. And Tim Zahn used to ink Dave Ross. And I went to the Chicago convention with him. And Tim, I thought he was Dave's best inker, but he wasn't a stylish inker. He didn't have a style that kind of showed up everywhere the same way on the pencils. You'd look at it and say, there's a little bit of pen there, and it looks like pen. There's a little bit of brush there. You change brush to a number 0 there. You can just look at it and read the whole book. It just isn't that good a way to do it. But the outcome on Dave's stuff I thought was beautiful. So we went to the Chicago convention together, and he was showing us an idea he had for a comic book. To me, it was a lot like Star Wars. And he showed us the pencils, and he drew coldly in that Marvel style. I think if he were here, he would say, it was in the Marvel style, Ron, but it was at a fill-in level. Like you meet guys who fill in for 4 books and you never hear from them again. I think he could have filled in on every Marvel book and nobody would have said boo. But I don't know if anybody would have said, we need you to pencil our 3rd level book. Certainly nobody did. They kept him as an inker, and I haven't seen him as an inker in many, many years. Talented man. Now me, if they said to me, we want you to draw the X-Men would come out looking bizarre. Everybody would be stiff. Nobody would be moving. When people fought, it would look like a boxing match instead of like a superhero slugfest. Just wouldn't look the same. Can't do that sort of thing. But this fellow Tim Zahn could. Where are they now? Haven't seen him in a while. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I don't recall the name. I probably got some of his books that he's inked and stuff like that.
If you have West Coast Avengers by Dave Ross, you do have Tim Zahn inked books. But I think even in the inkers, they want a guy like Tim Zahn, who might not be the best penciler, but if they ask him to fix something, he can redraw it and without the reader missing a beat. I can redraw specifics. Like one thing that I do know, I know human anatomy at least as well as 90% of the people in comics. I probably know it better than half the people in comics. I know it quite well, but taking that anatomy and putting it together into a flowing figure, it's very difficult and not something that I ever learned how to do. Could be that if I drew from life enough, if I had somebody around me saying, change this, try this, I would improve. I don't know if I'd ever be good, though. Some people are talented. I mean, I'm bringing up big guns here, but guys like Alex Toth and Frank Frazetta, people say they never drew a bad line in their life. You know, everything they drew looked pretty somehow. And I used to be friends with a fellow named Ken Stacy. We spent time together when I was in my late teens. And I think I could say that even when we were 17, 18 years old, Ken's drawings looked pretty. There was a lot wrong with them, but they just had this confidence about them, which he polished and perfected over the years. I don't think my drawings ever had that.
Maybe you just don't see it through your eyes, you know, when you look at your own art. Because I look at my stuff, and I'm going like, I'll have people go and saying, "Oh, that's really nice," and I'm going like, "Well, I can see all the mistakes that I made here." it's not really a good drawing. So we're more criticized. We're criticizing ourselves more than somebody else looking at their stuff. Maybe 100 people might look at it and go, "Wow, this is really great," but because we feel that and how we worked on it, and
well, I don't wish to be overly modest, but I don't wish to be overblown either.
Yeah.
And I would like to think I can look at my work and look at the successes and the failures I've had and make a reasonable judgment. Like I'm not trying to sell this book. Want me to prove it? There's 7 copies available in the Toronto library system. If you want to read it, go to the library. They'll get you a copy. The run is over on it. And if you're not in the Toronto system, get the library to buy a book. It would be very nice. But I'll ask you this, William. How much money do you think I make on this book? No idea?
No.
Okay. No. The book goes for $18.99 American. It goes for $25 Canadian. Now, the stores get a significant discount on that. They've got to pay their lighting, the people who work for them, their heat, taxes. So knock off about 50% for what the stores get. Then the distributor gets 15% on it. Then it has to be shipped. There are tariffs at the border. At least when I bought it, there were tariffs at the border. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think of the other expenses. Then the publisher takes his cut. And what I get for this book, I get about $1 when it's sold in a comic store, and about $2 when it's sold on Amazon. So if somebody buys it on Amazon because of the promotion, I make the price of a cup of coffee. That's about it. However, I do believe that the story I've told is a good story. And there's a wild card in it. The wild card is having it optioned as a movie. The chances of it being made as a movie are virtually zero. I mean, look at the movies that they're making. I think there's a significant chance it could get optioned, but only a crazy chance, like buying a ticket for the $1 million lottery, that it could ever be made into one. I think I've got a good story that people would enjoy, and I think my drawings in it, here's some drawings, I think they're perfectly adequate. But I'm not going to get carried away. I'm not going to go to a major company and say, look at this. I can do the same thing for you. They're not going to see it there. If they read it, they'd like it. Everyone who's read it has liked it. And no one has said, well, it's a nice story, but I wish somebody else drew it. Nobody else has said that because the drawing fits the story. But if I drew a Marvel style book, a DC style book, people would be saying this does not fit. It's not a good fit. So I like to think I'm not being modest. I'd like to think I'm not being overblown. I'd like to think I have a good understanding. And for both you and I, if we didn't like our own art, we wouldn't draw. We would break our pencils in two, and we'd rent the drawing room out to someone who needed it. That's what we would do. So I'm not doing that. I like my own art, but I just look at some other people and say, this guy's got to draw somebody else's script every day under pressure, knowing that he could be fired from the company at any time. And there's some pup nipping at his heels who wants that book every bit as much as he does. Some of those guys are good. And if you're working for a big company like Marvel, I don't know if I'm stretching it, but I've heard the analogy, it's like playing for an NHL hockey team. If you want to play NHL hockey, even if you can step off the bench and do a shift for a guy who just broke his ankle, you'd probably be pretty proud of it. And, I did letter for DC. That would be like being the water boy for the Leafs. It's not much beyond that. But even to do a fill-in book for Marvel, you've got to have some unusual abilities and a certain type of ability at that. How's that?
Yeah. So any out of the independents that you did?
Oh yeah, I did tons of them. Mostly as a lever.
A lot of Canadian ones, right? Didn't you do? You did quite a few Canadians.
I worked for probably dozens of comic companies and did well over 100 comic books, mostly as a letterer, sometimes as an inker, occasionally coloring, occasionally editing. There was one book I was just the cover artist on. I don't know how they got me for that, but I drew one cover, never drew the insides. And my career seemed to be doing 6-pagers for minor, but not absolutely tiny companies. Let's call them going concerns. Companies that were not located in mom's basement, but were small companies nonetheless. So I would do a 6-pager for one, a 4-pager for another. And, I could have gone on for a long time like that. I rather enjoyed it. But eventually those companies started going. They were publishing anthologies. Anthologies were going nowhere. The stores weren't buying them. There was too much of that junk out there. So I started on Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, and there's a catch-22 in it. You got to draw enough to sell it, but if you've drawn that much and nobody wants it, you are stuck having done a lot of work that nobody cares about. So I started working on this. I got up to page 79. They were penciled, inked, and lettered. Then I started sending it out, and the typical rejection was nothing. You sent it out, you have no idea what's happening there, and you never hear from them again. Occasionally I got a rejection saying, thank you very much, however, and it would be rejected. And then I got the odd one. I got one from Top Cow saying, we love it. If you do find a publisher, I'll buy it. The editor-in-chief, I suppose, or the acquisitions editor said, if it gets in print, I'll buy a copy. But if I printed it, I'd lose money, so I'm not going to print it. Then I got a reaction from a small publisher saying, I absolutely love it. And it was a full-page rejection. But it was a rejection saying, I'll lose money, not going to do it. So I sent it to Gary Reed, who was the owner and publisher of Caliber Press. It was called Caliber Entertainment at the time. And Gary answered within several hours, maybe within 4 hours. And Gary said, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And I said, it's going to be another year before it's finished. He said, well, go ahead. So I had a lot of incentive to do it. Then 1 month before it was to go to press, Gary died of a massive heart attack. And I thought the company may be dying with him. But within a day, I got a note from the new fellow saying all contracts will be honored and we will be pursuing new contracts. And he printed it soon after that. And it got up to number 16 in its category on Amazon. So it sold pretty well. I was very happy with the sales. But I kind of think, what if I was 23 and I did that? If I was 23, I don't know if I'd look at it realistically and say, okay, I can buy a lot of cup of coffees with the sales, but I can't really pay the rent for more than a month or two with the sales. And the thing took me, well, it would have taken me 2 years to do. Pencils, inks, letters, writing it took a long time. So it was a gamble. You don't want to quit at least I don't want to quit my day job over that. Now, when Gary and I were discussing it, I said to him, I've got this other story. It's 41 pages, and you might be interested. And he said, well, we're actually publishing an anthology, and I don't want the initial stories in the anthology to be that long, 41 pages, but I can publish it in 2 issues of the anthology after maybe issue 6. So as I said, oh, and I also sold him a painting. And he said, well, you said, by sell, I mean, when it's published, I get the money, not here's the money, we'll wait to publish it. It didn't work that way with Caliber. So Gary said he'd use it, but then he died. And it was very difficult to say to the new guys, Gary said he was going to take my painting and my 41-page story. So 3-4 years later, I said to them, I had this little deal going with Gary. What happened to that anthology? And they said it has become Singular Creator Books, mostly of about 110 pages. So I said, I've got 110 pages around. I've got that 41-pager. I've got a lot of other stuff around too. So they okayed it. They actually rejected 2 stories, but the rejection was they were actually good stories. They just didn't fit with the others. All the stories here, pardon me, how can I do this? All the stories here are about interactions with comics or the world of comics. They're generally about being a fan. And if I could, my glasses, excuse me, I'm going to read you the back cover. An anthology of illustrated stories about the comic book culture. Meet Norm Radinsky, comic traveler and the spirit guardian of an entire art form. Join Captain Bill, comic store owner, whose store is stuck in 1971. Share in Calabogie Jake's struggle with comic book addiction. Read the first Cerebus story since it was put to bed with issue 300. See Biff Davis pursue a comic book older than he is. And read about the comic book that changed Ron Kasman's life. And I got quotes on the back from Peter Bagg, Dave Sim, and Scott Edelman. And you probably don't know the name Scott Edelman, but are you old enough to remember the Marvel Bullpen Bulletins page?
Yep.
Yeah, it stands soapbox. And
yeah.
Marvel Bulletin. He wrote it. His job was to write it and sound like Stan Lee as he wrote it. So he read my previous book and loved it and gave me a quote. So I got good reviews, good people liking it. My dear friends liked it. This is important because the guys that I really trust are maybe 3 friends. And if it's no good, they're going to say to me, Ron, it's no good.
Yeah.
You got to change that. Get rid of that. Erase that. They'll tell me. And those are the guys that I'm working for. If all 3 of those guys say, hey, that's pretty good, it's good enough. Then it's good enough.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's what happened after I did the short stories. I did Geek of the Gods. I did Tower of the Comic Book Freaks. And I'm doing another now. And it's got a working title, Cult Following. And it goes back to my favorite period, about the time I finished high school, about the time I started art school. And it's about a guy who gets picked up by a cult in downtown Toronto. His uncle pulls him into it, and he tries to get his uncle out of it while his uncle tries to pull him in. So I'm on the whole thing's written, the whole thing's laid out, penciled 125 and a half pages. When this is over, I'll do the last half page on page 126.
Well, talking about doing the book, what's your process of doing it? So do you type out the story before you draw it and do the layouts and stuff like that?
Yes, I do. I write it as a short story, not as a comic book dialogue, and it's got to follow a certain structure. It's got to be interesting to me. Okay, now I don't know how this sounds, and I don't want to sound like an egomaniac, because Marvel and DC are simply not knocking on my door. But if Marvel or DC knocked on my door and said, we'd like you to draw one issue of Fantastic Four, which isn't going to happen for good reason, I'd probably say yeah, because that would be like a lifetime dream. But I don't think I'd enjoy doing it much, and I don't know if I'd do a second. Being glued to the drawing board, drawing someone else's ideas, would be a little bit frustrating and a little bit boring for me.
Well, how would it be if they came to you and said, we want you to be the writer instead of the artist.
I could do it. I don't know if I'm good enough. Writing is not as demanding as drawing. Drawing, like, it takes you a day to do a page. I mean, a good guy might do two, but writing doesn't take that long. I think if I was going to be the writer and I was going to put away a few days a month for it, I would have to talk to the editor at length, saying, what do you want? It would have to be a book that was largely editorial, and I could kind of wordsmith it over their structure. I think I could do that. I'd do it for a while. I think I'd do it for a while.
Yeah, it'd probably be a little bit of fun for you, because that's something that you enjoy, you know? The Fantastic Four and stuff like that. So you probably would give them a story that would come back when you were a kid reading the Fantastic Four and stuff like that.
I don't know what I would do. I'd have to talk to them about what they wanted. Here's something I'll tell you, and I let's see. The chances of Richard Cumley listening in are slim.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did was I wrote 12 Captain Canuck stories, and I'm very proud of every one. So I didn't want to open the sack and say, here you are, to Richard, but I did tell him one story, and his eyes glazed over as I was telling it, and I realized very quickly in the telling, he didn't care. There's no reason why he should. And then he told me the direction he wanted the character to go, and my eyes started to glaze over in the telling. It's his character. It is not my character. He can do it any way he wants. I can't. But my view of it was just very different. So I think I could structure something like the Fantastic Four, but it wouldn't be the same structure they have now. I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
So I'd rather have an editor say, this is what we're doing, and then I would just build it along that.
Yeah. Marvel's not the same as it used to be when we were reading it. Bought over by Disney. They're watering down a lot of the characters. I don't know if you heard about the book New Warriors. Did Snowflake and Safe Space, and they're binary characters or something they call them, and they're it's just a mess. They got what was another one? Screen Time. He got his powers. He's able to connect to the internet with his powers, but he got his powers through his uncle's experimental internet gas. I don't know what internet gas is, but the book. So many people complained about it. I don't think Marvel's going to print it out.
Okay, what I think, two opinions here. I don't know when Frank Miller did his last Daredevil. I might have been in my mid-30s, but that was the last superhero book I purchased off the stands. What Howard Sniatowski said when I read comic books and didn't go out with girls, well, Howard eventually told the future. After Daredevil number 299, I stopped reading that type of comic and put my energies into other things. Mm-hmm. So there's that problem. I'm not connected to the whole scene. And the additional problem is what you're talking about. It's not that it would be impossible for me to do, but it would be better for someone who lives in that culture to do it. Yeah. Which is probably someone in their mid-20s, maybe 30s, who's a good writer and is completely entranced by that sort of story. I'm not. To me, I don't have much to say about those things. So let those do it for whom it means something.
Right.
I'll write my own little stories. If somebody buys them, great. If nobody buys them, well, that's not so great. But I think a few people will.
Yeah. Have you thought of maybe you still got a contract with Caliber, don't you?
Yes,
with your books?
Yeah.
Yes. So how many books do you have with them?
Just 2. I'm not an employee of Caliber. I've contracted 2 books through Caliber.
Okay.
So the third one could go to any company that will take it.
Okay.
But I don't know what companies. What someone told me. I said I got rejected by 16 companies for Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, and the person who knew a lot more than me said, "That's about what you would expect." Usually, the rejection is not because it's bad; it's because it doesn't fit. You had to find a company that fit. So, what I would like is for my next book to be bought up by, you know, Simon and Schuster, McClellan Stewart, one of these big companies who will advertise it like crazy, get it on the New York Times bestseller list, get it reviewed by the New York Review of Books. I would take that over Caliber, but something tells me that Caliber, it's a good company, it's an honest company. It's been around 25 years, so they're not going to take off with my checks. They're good people there. I'm lucky to be working for them. And I'll be lucky if Caliber wants that next book. But I'll still be thinking about McClellan Stewart and the other ones.
Yeah, yeah. And have you gone to maybe like Image?
No,
Image does a lot. Image does a lot of different stuff. They're looking, they don't do a lot of superhero stuff anymore. Walking Dead is from them, and a bunch of other books.
Okay. I might have done half a dozen stories that were published by Image 10, 12 years ago. They were Image imprints. And they sold more because they had the name Image on them. I really have no idea what they're doing now. Mm-hmm. But what I would love, I'm not crazy, but it would be nice to have a company, one, who was looked at when people go through that Diamond catalog every month. I think many of them look at Caliber. It's a good company. I would like to have a company with an advertising budget, and Caliber has an advertising budget, but it's not as big as some other companies. I'd like to have a company that gets hits, and Caliber has had some huge hits. Their biggest one was probably The Crow. And The Crow was the number 10 film, the 10th largest grossing film of the year 2000. Now, that's not like The Avengers, the biggest grossing film of the year, 2018, 2019. It's not The Avengers, but it was the number 10 film of the year 2000. So they're not a bad company. They're a pretty good company. But if one of those guys from Marvel came to me and said, "I've been looking for you. What do you have now that can be used?" I said, "Well, I have this thing finished in about a year." They said, "We'll put our inkers on it. We'll put our letters on it. You'll have it finished in 4 months. And there's an advertising budget. And people will notice it. And the people we have in the film world," by the way, Caliber has people in the film world too. That's why it's called Caliber Entertainment. But Marvel probably has more people in the film world. For a creator, that's very, very attractive. But Caliber's pretty good too. So I'm happy to be there.
All right. Yeah. Just some suggestions I thought I'd pass by just in case.
Good.
You may want to look them up. So you got that book almost done, that new one that you're working on. So
125 pages out of 200 is 5/8 of the way through.
Well, that's pretty good. And I'm probably taking up your time for doing those drawings too, right?
Okay. Today? It's okay. It's wonderful talking to you. It's a good break.
Yeah, and you need to rest once in a while. So I don't know if you've been checking out the other videos that I've put up. Have you been checking those out?
No, I haven't. Who else have you talked to? I understand that you had to push Frank Miller to the end of the line when you found out you could get.
Yeah, we got to push him up. And John Byrne, we got to push him. Yeah. He is my cousin, somewhere down the line, but I got to push him to the side. Now, yeah. I interviewed Dan Fraga. I don't know if you've heard of him. He did a book called Black Flag for Image 25 years ago. So he's going to relaunch it. He just did a great Indiegogo campaign, which he raised, I think, $200,000 or something like that.
Holy cow!
Ethan Van Sciver, you ever heard of him?
No.
He did Green Lantern with Jeff Johns.
Gee.
He just did a. He just did a.
No, that's really good.
Yeah.
I'm in good company, boy.
Well, I haven't done an interview with Ethan Van Sciver yet, but Dan Frega's friends with him. But they've raised that Ethan has, for his own book for Indiegogo, he's did a book called Cyberfrog, which he did back in the 90s before he went over and worked for DC and Marvel and stuff like that. So he revived that character, did a book. I think he reprinted the original ones, put them in color because they were black and white. His second campaign, Wrecked Planet, is reached the $1 million mark.
In an Indiegogo promotion?
Indiegogo, yeah.
Wow. No, I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know that these guys, only one of whose name I've even heard before, were so popular that they had followers who would put up $1 million. Wow.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Ethan does a YouTube channel. Where he goes on at all weird hours and stuff like that. You don't know what Ethan is wearing when he's doing these live podcasts. He's wearing hats, he's wearing wigs, and he'll talk about the comic book industry and stuff like that. So I think that's what kind of helps with him with promotion, is doing stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a lot of followers on his YouTube channel, and then that translates on the Indiegogo and stuff like that. So
okay, they've thought this out.
Yeah. But so is there anything else you want to talk about here, Ron, that we haven't discussed about?
No, that's my whole life from tip to tail. That's about it. I'm on Facebook on my own name, Ron Kasman. If you want to see some of my art, you can go to ronkasman.tumblr.com. If you want to talk to me about my new book, contact me on Facebook. That's about it.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll end the live cast right here, and just hold on for a moment, Ron, and I'll talk to you off when we go offline here.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. I'll have I think I have another guest, but I have to confirm with him. I have a guy named Paul Quinn, but I have to reconfirm with him today. So everybody have a good day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Thanks, William. Bye-bye.